Mike Rich.
How are you? Carl, it's been a long time. You're looking good.
Oh, as are you, my friend.
Oh.
You know, this whole project is worth it just for that, to see people I haven't seen in a long time and just to smile and say, how you doing?
I'll bet, and same with me. I have, I think I'm like so many people that just, haven't seen a lot of people for a year plus. And then, you see them again and you start talking and, it's like you're, starting right back up again.
Well, yeah, some of the conversations I've had with folks have been like, and it's been like 20 or 30 years and it's like we're right back in the newsroom or we're right back in the news car.
Yeah. There's still a couple. I mean, Bill Gallagher and I have stayed in really, really close contact over the past year and a half, and so that's great to have that connection. Yeah.
Well, are you still in the Portland area? You still Beaverton area? Where were you when I last talked to you?
No, we're a little bit west of that. We're kind of out splitting the difference between Newburgh and Hillsborough up on Bald Peak.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So that's where we're at, and it's great out here. And we've been here for now a little more than a decade. Again, another example of how quickly time scoots along. But
and the kids are not there anymore, are they?
No, the kids are not here because the kids aren't kids anymore. They're all in their 30s now, and we have 4 grandchildren.
I had to go. I'm catching up. I just had the run grandson.
Nice. I heard from somebody when we were expecting, when Jessica was expecting our first grandson, Jack, and somebody had told her, told us that grandparenting is the only job that's better than advertised, and it's advertised really well.
Wow, that's awesome.
That was proved to have been the case, yeah.
So what's keeping you busy these days? It's tough to keep track of Mike Rich and all his projects and what's going on.
Well, my industry, as you know, went dark,
right.
When the pandemic started, and in a lot of ways has still not recovered to what it was before, which it probably wasn't going to do anyway. I mean, it was what has happened is the trends for the movie industry we're pointing in the direction of people enjoying streaming at home, and the only part of the equation that, and they're still trying to figure it out, is okay, if we're not going to be able to fill up movie theaters, the way that we used to, and I do think they're probably going to get back close to that, because especially with certain films, like you'll see a Marvel film or something like that. I think those are always going to, and I mean, if I'm watching a Blazer basketball game and I see 10,000 people, 12,000 people, and soon to be probably more than that, then I think then people will go back into the theaters as well. But I think it just accelerated a trend that was already happening, which is people like those short, limited series. They like their 13 episodes of whatever it might be dumped at once, and that's how they enjoy getting their entertainment. So
you started in that industry writing full-length movies, and that's how I remember you were making your mark. So are you switching now to writing those limited series for Netflix, Amazon, Hulu, that kind of thing?
No, I had just finished up a script March of last year, and so I always my creative cycle is that, because it takes so much out of you, when you're writing a script, that I was probably going to take time off anyway, and so I did that, and I just kind of said, okay, I'm going to sit back, I'm going to watch. Because writing is actually the one part of the process that didn't change. Because writers, for the most part, are socially distant by nature.
You're in a pandemic for your life.
Right. It was just like, okay, so we're doing what we always do. Okay, great. We'll be good at this. And so I have been content to, with the 4 grandchildren, I kind of like the notion of spending time with them. That took a while before we could do that. But I've been just kind of writing for myself a little bit right now, toying with a book right now. And it was when this all started for me with finding Forrester, which I still cannot believe was now more than 20 years ago. And I got to meet Curtis Hanson, who was the writer-director of LA Confidential and just such a terrific talent. And he gave me a great piece of advice. He said, always have one of your own going. And what he meant by that was have something, whether it's a script, whether it's a book, whether it's a short story, that you're right, you don't tell anybody else about it, and just do it for yourself. And he said that will keep you sharp, and it will also kind of keep you close to why you got into writing in the first place, which is, there's no deadlines, there's no notes coming in, and you're doing it, just to tell a story like you did before. So that's kind of where I'm at right now.
So let me ask this as sensitively as I can and expect whatever answer you come up with. I've known you've been successful with what you've been doing. Do you have to write another script? Are you in a position where, you're people, some of us work for the next paycheck. You've had some pretty successful projects. Could you stop right now and be okay?
I could. And that's purely on, that standpoint that you're alluding to. But from a creative standpoint, there are more stories that I want to tell, and there probably are more screenplays that I want to write. The one thing that concerns me a little bit is I worry, and I find it, I just puzzle on it, is, we're coming off a year, 15 months, which has been tough and has been, and it seems like, it doesn't seem like it is happening where comedies are not being made as much as they used to. Some of the style of films that I used to write, I mean, uplifting, inspirational, those seem to be going away. And I'm confused by the fact that we've lived through an era where, there's plenty of stuff to get us down. And then we watch TV, which deals with dark dystopian stuff as well. And so I'm waiting, and I anticipate, and I think, comedic actors and actresses are probably thinking the same thing, is let's wait for this wave to come in, because there has to be an ebb and flow to this where people do have to want to laugh and to cry, and in a good way. So
what you're saying is you should have been more of a comic book nerd as a young child, so you would have that basis to get into that genre.
Isn't that the truth? Isn't that the truth? And let me tell you something. The last project that I got screen credit on was Cars 3, and it is the funniest thing, because now if I go in, or if I'm talking to, and I like to go to schools and talk, or Zoom schools and talk with kids. And, if I mention finding Forrester, these 5th graders just, and right. But the minute you get to Lightning McQueen and Jackson Storm and such, it's just the faces light up. It's crazy.
Yeah, and that'll help with the grandkids eventually, right?
Eventually, yes. My youngest, Henry, who's only 2 years old, about to turn 3, he loves Cars 3. He's got all these things, and I love playing with the little figures with him and everything like that. He doesn't have a clue. I mean, if I were to say, hey, grandson, but I actually wrote the screenplay for this,
Good luck.
But yeah, but one day, you're right.
Someday. Well, let's go back to the beginning. We first met when you were in radio at KGW. I don't remember. Are you a Portland guy?
No, I'm an northeastern Oregon guy. That's where I went to high school, in Enterprise, Oregon.
Oh, yeah.
Way up in the northeastern part of the state. kicked around, went to Oregon State, started off at King Broadcasting in Spokane with KINK-FM and the stations up there back in the Dorothy Bullitt days, where I
That definitely is the good old days.
Oh my gosh. I mean, I look back and I remember once a quarter, I was in the news business there, and this was the same when I was at KGW. The corporate team would come down from Seattle, where King Broadcasting was based, and they would have, I can't remember the exact term, which was for public affairs. They would say, okay, what are the 5 issues that, 5-10 issues that we're going to deal with, and how are we going to, this was back in the day when they had this thing called the fairness doctrine, which was that you had to have both sides of an issue in equal measures. So,
you had to earn your FCC license by doing public affairs where you're not going to make any money.
That's correct. And they took it seriously. And Dorothy Bullitt, was the very definition of community broadcasting. Yeah. That was, we are broadcasting in this community, so we're going to serve this community.
And you're only a product of what you're exposed to. And you and I were lucky enough to be part of the Bullitt family when it owned King. I feel sorry for people in the business now that have come after. All they know is this corporate ownership and the companies that own 80 stations around the country, and we were at least exposed or products of that wonderful community broadcasting effort that the Bullitt sisters in Seattle and King Broadcasting spearheaded. And we can always say, hey, back in the day, it was like this. And I think you kind of have to look at that with a little bit of reverence if you're looking at it from where those folks are now.
I agree. Do you know, when I was first hired from Spokane to come down to KGW, my shift was 7 p.m. until 4 a.m. It was an overnight radio news shift. And KGW had a news staff of 6-7 full-timers. Yeah. And it was back in the day when if you combined the listening audience to KGW-AM and KEX-AM, 2 AM stations, they controlled 40% of the listening market in the market, in the Portland market. It just, those were days long ago, that's for sure.
Yeah, you mentioned that staff. I'm trying to think of, the names come and go, but Bill Gallagher was there. Mike Beard was there. Bill Cooper, what was he, news? Yeah, Bill Cooper was there.
Well, he was at KEX.
Okay.
Bill was at KEX. Marie Dodds was there.
John Erickson, Sharon Mitchell started in radio. Lou Frederick started in radio. Cheryl Marshall. It was just, and I remember we'd go to press conferences, and there would be the 3 or 4 TV stations, and there'd be KGW radio and KEX radio and KYXI and KXL and all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it was just everybody. There had to be a half dozen, maybe more, stations that really did have a somewhat significant presence. Right. Top of the hour. Dave Paul.
Yes.
It was Lyle Arthur. Lyle Arthur was working, with Craig Walker back in the day. That was an iconic.
And as I've talked about with some of my radio friends, Craig and John, that I've talked with, there were all these events around the city. There was the Jazz Festival, or the Bite, or the Rose Festival Fun Center. They were all sponsored by either KGW or KISN or somebody, and you were right there touching in with all the people in the community.
I remember, because KEX was the voice of the Blazers for a long time, and KGW won a bidding war with that.
Oh yeah, yes.
And that was big. I mean, that was a seismic shift. It was a guarantee for one of those AM stations. It was a difference maker in the ratings, significant difference maker.
And the theory behind that was, I mean, you were basically at the beck and call of the Blazers. They controlled that time period. They did all the advertising. They paid their announcers. They made all the money. You just gave them that airtime, and then you put a pregame show in front of it, and then you put a
Right.
postgame show where your sports guy was talking to people at a restaurant in the aftergame. And what you hoped was, is everybody would turn off their radio, and the next morning when they turned it on in the car or wherever, they were listening to your morning drive.
Yeah, they hadn't shipped they hadn't switched the channel. That's right. And I mean, I did some of those shows. I did the post game, the fifth quarter. I did that for a while. You know, it was just amazing how, you know, I talk about how there was a full-time news presence. There was for a station that had the Blazers, they had a full-time sports presence as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, something, really something.
And then I can't remember, you actually came down to the KGW newsroom and worked as an assignment desk worker.
Yeah.
That was before you went to KINK Radio, right? There was kind of an in-between?
In between,
Yeah.
exactly, yeah. You know, because what had happened is KGW-AM, you know, had dipped its toe in the talk radio waters.
Oh, they dove in, don't you think, Mike? Remember they just reformatted everything, and they brought people from out of the market, and they had all these new talk shows, and it lasted about a year or so.
Yeah, it did. And I mean, I remember Steve Wexler was our program director, sharp guy. He, you know, came from the Midwest, I think from Milwaukee, but Turi Ryder and Peter Weisbach were some of the voices there. And you know, it was interesting because, you know, it was viewed as, boy, these guys are pushing the envelope. And I look back on it now, and that pushing of the envelope was a nudge of what, you know, what needed to happen, I guess. Or
I feel like it was throwing a dart at a board is what I look at it, and hoping it stuck.
Right. And so there was that one day when they decided, okay, 1 year's enough. And Stan Mack called everybody in, and we all showed up, and there were a bunch of manila folders that were sitting there on the table, and that's never a good day.
Yeah.
And I got one of those manila folders. So that's, like you said, I was doing some stuff in the interim before I went to
Yeah, you were one of our assignment editors, and I think weekends, whose job it was to come in and collect all the data and the story ideas and send people out and hope it was the right call and keep track of what was going on. A very unsung job in a newsroom. And also, you know, probably the first place the blame went if something went wrong.
Absolutely. That's so true. And, you know, it was funny the other day, I can't remember who I was talking to, but, you know, I mean, I'll give you, for example, getting back to when I was starting at KGW Radio, and it was at 7P to 4A. People forget, you know, when I initially started, there were no cell phones. There were no cell phones. And not only were there no cell phones, because as an extension of that, there was no navigation. So if I got if there was we had the scanners going, and if there was a 2-alarm or a 3-alarm fire that was in, you know, wherever, we used the Thomas guide. We used the old, we got
a book
the
with maps in it.
And I still remember that book where you'd look at, there was a page like it was at J4, and you go across like that, and then if the road ran out, you turned the page, or it told you what page to go to. And oh my gosh, I talk about just antiquated.
I wonder what it's like to own stock in the Thomas Map Guide company these days.
Oh my gosh, they still make it. They still do make it. Oh yeah. And and my kids were just howling when I told them that story. So yeah, that's part and parcel of the thing when you're an assignment editor. You know, the first job is to get your reporter where they're supposed to go. Yeah.
Well, all those years in radio news and a little bit touching there in the TV news as the assignment director, what stories stand out over time? What are the big ones that you ended up on?
You know, I got down there after St. Helens. Just, you know, that was after that. But there was just, for me, the Rajneeshis were a big story.
Yeah.
That was, and so I was front and center on a lot of that. I spent a lot of time, covering the nuts and bolts of that. And that's another thing where, the limited run series, what was it, Wild Wild Country, I think is what it was
what
called.
a great documentary.
Again, my kids watched that, and I told them that it had never come up before that I said I was there for that story. I was doing that, and they kept watching it, and they'd call me up and they go, no, that could not have happened.
Yeah. And you could say, I got the reporter's notebook right here.
It happened. So yeah, the Rajneeshis.
Remember Tanya Harding? That's, I mean, not her. Remember that story that lasted for months in our market?
Yeah, I remember. What was his name? He was an NBC network reporter, and he lived in that newsroom.
David Bloom.
David Bloom.
Yeah.
Yeah, who passed away while embedded as a war correspondent, I believe. Yeah. Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah. Another reporter we had, Mike, that was embedded with us was Ann Thompson, who was at the NBC affiliate in Detroit, because it started there. That's where the U.S. trials were, where the attack happened, and so that station sent her to Portland. She was in Portland for several months, and she was outstanding, and that turned into a network correspondent job for her for NBC. Every single day, every single story was that for several months.
Story, and I had already I don't know how old was Tanya when this all happened? I mean, she was early 20s.
I don't know. She might have been about 20. No, she was early 20s, if anything. Yeah.
Because I had been in the market for a little bit, and I remember getting the assignment. This was shortly after I started work at KGW, to go to Lloyd Center and interview this 15-year-old girl, and it was Tanya.
Yeah.
And and she was just this diminutive, seemed like, quiet, all the things that would change, over time. But yeah.
Well, Mike, I claim, and accurately, I believe, that I discovered Tanya because I did the first ever story with her when she was 13.
When she was 13, okay.
Yeah, before she was going to the U.S. trials and competing and successfully, because her coach, Diane Rollison, just called our sports department and said, what if I told you I had a 13-year-old prodigy who does more triple jumps than any of those women you're watching at the thing? And I went, well, I want to come meet her. And photographer Terry Renteria and I got up really early. Yeah. We went out to the Beaverton Ice Arena, and we videotaped her and interviewed her and did 2 stories about her and her Olympic dream. A year later, she was at the trials and in the U.S. championships. Yeah. That is my claim to fame. I discovered.
I remember, because I working with Mike Beard, in the KGW newsroom. He was the one every anniversary of St. Helens, because remember, he was the one who was up in the helicopter who first saw it and was starting to, the first minor eruption and the first minor plume. And so, he kind of reveled in that. I remember he loved telling that story over and over again, because it was a good story to tell.
And in that era also was the wonderful and enigmatic Bud Clark as our mayor.
That's what I was going to say. I'll tell you.
City Hall was a blast to go to that meeting.
Oh my gosh! And I mean, I can see some of those, Gretchen Kafori and Mike Lindbergh and those teams. It was, I mean, that's when you covered City Hall. And yeah. I mean, it wasn't. I mean, Bud's personality was icing on the cake. But people did. I mean, they did that. They covered City Hall. They had a City Hall beat, and that kind of changed over time. But boy, he was Bud. God,
so then you moved on to KINK Radio, which seemed like a real nice fit. You and Les Sarnoff doing the mornings together, and that lasted quite a long time. And you guys were real successful.
Yeah, lasted a few years. right, yeah. And it was interesting because Les just had this innate skill, because Les would get there
Oh, I know.
at 11:45, midnight. That's when he would get there. And what he would do is he would roll videotape on the TV newscasts from 11, and he did it. He had an agreement with KGW that if he credited them, he could lift the audio from that. And he would sit there and he had a yellow legal pad, and Les would sit there and write it all out in longhand, and it wasn't writing out a kind of a framework. It was word for word. But his amazing superpower was that when he would read that segment, to the audience during the broadcast of the morning show, he sounded like he was just coming off the top of his head. And his voice was Portland radio for so many years. It really was.
I liked Les. He was a good man, and he was a hard worker, and he was great for our station. I had an issue, and I think I talked about it with you a few times when you were there, of that process of transcribing from the TV stories into his radio the next morning, because the agreement was that if we went to press conferences, if we covered news stories, that KINK could use the sound that we had. If we went to a city council meeting and you weren't there, and we recorded an interview with an official, the stories I did though were a little more enterprising and creative writing, and I felt as though Les lifted some of that creativity, not nuts and bolts and facts, and did not credit. And I talked to him a little bit, and I think I talked to you a little bit, and I think he tried to improve on that, but there were some times when I felt I'm listening to myself, my writing, when Les was reading it in the morning.
It's coming out as a great, that's, I would go into the newsroom, and this talks about how the physical newsrooms change, and the newsroom in KINK, was, I don't know, this little
small box.
Small box. But you remember how, you used to splice. You'd put that tape in the block and you'd splice, and you'd use tape to put it together. And I would come in every morning and there would be a heap, just an enormous heap of clippings and tapes and stuff. And so my day started with getting a cup of bad coffee and lifting that big thing up and popping it into the trash. But yeah, those were good days. And if ever there was a station that lived up to its motto, true music, it was KINK. Started on Christmas Day of '68, and even at the height of its #1 run certainly in morning drive, they only ran like 4 to 6 minutes of commercials an hour.
It was truly FM, wasn't it?
It was so FM. And when I first started, they still had the turntables in there.
Really?
There were no carts. There was nothing. They still had the turntables, and every once in a while, Les would turn and bump something, and it was FM, because you hear the stylus bouncing along.
So let's get to the Finding Forrester story. At what point do you start, you got your day job, you're raising the kids and the family, and you're working that early morning radio shift, morning drive, which is tough physically on anybody. At what point do you start writing this wonderful story that turned out to be Finding Forrester?
I had written I had an interest in just dipping my toe in that water and trying to write a screenplay. And so I spent a lot of time at Powell's. I often joke that was my film school, because I didn't go to film school. University of Powell's they had the Pearl Room. I remember the Pearl Room was where the film section was.
Yeah, something else we're going to lose, Mike. Powell's.
Yeah, and I know. And but they had scripts, books and scripts, and so I read a lot of those. So I wrote a couple of 3 really, really terrible screenplays, but valuable screenplays, because they allowed me to learn a little bit, make mistakes, and do all of those things.
You got to write a few bad ones before you can write a good one.
No question, no question. And so I got the idea for Finding Forrester on air, morning drive at KINK. And it was one of those stories that Les had, I don't think you did this one, but it was one of those where he had Joyce Maynard, who was a syndicated columnist, I think, at the Washington Post for the time. And she was a great writer. She actually went on to write the book that became the movie To Die For with Nicole Kidman, and directed by Portland's Gus Van Sant.
Exactly.
And so Joyce Maynard had written a book, and it was about her affair with J.D. Salinger. And the reclusive author, everybody knows it, Catcher in the Rye. And I just remember, because I had now, from a standpoint of writing screenplay, I was really trying to find something that was going to be a solid idea for me, because I felt I was learning some things. And I thought, okay, if I get to find the right idea, I think I can execute this next one better. And it was during that little segment on KINK where Les, on his little yellow legal pad, had written this little, where he was talking about how the great authors of the previous century, whether it was Salinger, whether it was Fitzgerald, whether it was Shaw, whoever it was, they usually were quirky,
reclusive, and I can still remember him saying, where he said, and most of them put up a wall around themselves, and nobody got through the wall. And that was the seed for me. I remember thinking, what if somebody got through the wall? And that was the seed that got me writing Finding Forrester, which I didn't tell anybody about. I didn't tell Les, didn't tell anybody. The last thing I was going to do. And so I wrote it in early 1998, the first draft. David Wolfson was his name. He was the head of the Oregon Film Office, which was in Portland. And I went to him for advice because I had finished the first draft of it. And he said, well, you got to enter it in a contest. And the contest, screenwriting contest, right?
I didn't, yeah. And but he recommended two. He recommended two in particular. He recommended the Nickel Fellowship competition, which was generally regarded to be the more prestigious of the two, and the Austin Film Festival. So I entered it in both contests. Finding Forrester didn't make the first cut in Austin, and it won the fellowship there were 5 fellowship winners out of, I think there was 4,400 scripts that year. And so I come in, I still hadn't told anybody about it. And so I come in the day that I got the first letter saying it was a quarterfinalist. And that was, I expected still 226 scripts out of these 4,400. So I'm thinking, hey, top 5%, that's great. I mean, nothing else is going to happen, but that's great. And so I told Les about it, and he goes, oh, we got to talk about this. And so we talk about it. So all of a sudden, that was the introduction to the audience of, okay, let's see what happens. And that was followed by a semifinalist letter and a finalist letter, and then winning it, and there,
And part of the award there was that the movie would be produced. Am I right?
No. No, they don't make it. They gave you a $25,000 fellowship award, and it was their intent of the competition that you would find, if you needed to take a little sabbatical from your work or something like that, that you could write another screenplay. They were just trying to foster the opportunity to. But my Finding Forrester sold before I could even get down for the awards ceremony. And which meant I was not eligible for the $25,000 prize because I was technically a professional screenwriter at that point. And so
you would have had to choose between the award and the selling of the screenplay.
which was an easy decision. But yeah, so that was how that played out. And then I stayed I stayed at Kink because the next film was The Rookie.
Yeah.
And I mean, radio, volatile profession. Movie industry, extremely volatile profession. And so there was part of me that goes, man, I can't. I like radio. I don't want to give that up. And I remember I had a couple of people who said, no, you got it. You'll kick yourself if you don't give that opportunity in the film industry every ounce of your effort.
Yeah.
And they were right. And so I did.
How did Sean Connery get involved in Finding Forrester?
Really quickly, and he was both producer and the star when Sony bought it, and the producer was Larry Mark, who was coming off some great films, As Good as It Gets, Jerry Maguire. So Sony, right out of the gate, I mean, I'm often asked what actor, if there was one that I had in mind when I wrote it, and I said, yeah, there always is, but mine was Robert Duvall. I just kind of had that image in my head.
Mm-hmm.
But they said, well, we're going to give it to Sean Connery and see what he thinks about it. And I mean, who am I to say anything? But I say, sure, great, fine. And he was in the Bahamas, and the head of production actually flew down to the Bahamas, gave him a copy of the script, and he came on board. And then it was just, I mean, it was silly how it just seemed like, okay, Gus Van Sant, he's going to direct it. Okay, F. Murray Abraham, he wins an Oscar for Amadeus, he's going to be in it. And then it was just like the dominoes were falling in just a crazy, crazy manner. And
there's your welcome to Hollywood moment, right? All that.
Yeah.
Here you got this script that's so much of you. And you're going, oh great, and then boom, boom, this guy, this company, this actor, this director.
I didn't know any better.
It's amazing anything gets done in that industry, right?
Right, it is. But ignorance was bliss for me, and I was plenty ignorant about a lot of things. And so I just kind of rolled with it. And the way that it worked, I remember, was they bought the script, and then they contractually had to let me take a swing at the first two rewrites.
Yeah.
And so I wrote the first rewrite, and it was okay. It had moved the story along, but now looking back at it, I know it didn't move it along as much as they wanted to. But I really wrote a good second draft, and so they stayed with me. And I was the sole writer on it when time came around for credit. And I remembered I was at the premiere, and the premiere was at the Ziegfeld Theater in New York. And so I waited for just the right moment afterwards to go to Sean. And so I go down to Sean, and we're exchanging a toast. And I said, I want to thank you because you stuck with me. He was a producer, but he was Sean Connery. And on any given day, if he had awakened and said, I'm tired of Mike Rich writing this story, I would have been gone. Mm-hmm. So I said, thanks for sticking with me. I really appreciate it. And I know you didn't have to do that. And it was the greatest thing that he ever could have told me, which was, instead of just saying, oh, you're welcome, he said, Mike, if the words hadn't have been there, you wouldn't have been either. And I thought that was just such a terrific thing. Yeah, I don't know, it was interesting. I had never asked him to sign a copy of the script. And I mean, the movie was out, and he moved back in the Bahamas, and I called, I didn't have his number anymore, so I called his agent over at CAA and said, hey, if I sent you the title page of a script, would you send it on to him? And he said, absolutely. And he did, and Sean got back, and it was a beautiful page and a beautiful sentiment.
Is it framed on that wall?
It's right over here next to me, as a matter of fact. So, yeah.
And that Finding Forrester was nominated for an Academy Award in original screenplay, right?
It was not.
Really?
No, it wasn't. There were a number of awards that it was nominated for, and I was okay with that. I mean, it was, but there were you know, so many. I mean, I smile at this last Oscars when Anne Roth wins, you know, the award for best costume design, and she's 95 years old, and she was our costume designer on Finding
Nice.
Forrester. Yeah, and I stayed in touch with Rob Brown. Rob Brown played, you know, the main character of Jamal Wallace, who's who had never acted before, and just came in trying to get a bit part and maybe, you know, pay a few bills. And I've stayed in touch with him, and, you know.
Well, I'll say this to anybody watching or listening to this podcast: if you haven't seen the film Finding Forrester, you need to go find it. You know, in the old days, we'd send you to a video rental, but it's really a wonderfully nice story, and well produced, well acted, and you know, the fact that we know you, who's, you know, it came from your heart, is really, really neat. I'll tell you, Mike, one of my greatest memories was going to the premiere that you hosted in Portland at the Lloyd Cinemas, where you invited all your friends, all the people you had worked with, and we all came and we filled that theater. And you said a few words at the beginning. We were all, you know, applauding and so proud of our friend, this wonderfully nice person who was a great radio guy and a person that we just cared about immensely to have got success. And we're sitting there, and then the opening credits come up, and, you know, Sean Connery and da 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 da, and then screenplay Mike Rich. My heart just jumped. It was one of those moments where, you know, you see one of your friends get the pinnacle of what they want to do. That feeling overcame me, and still does when I think about it, Mike, to see all your friends there, and boom, screenplay Mike Rich. And we were all there celebrating you.
I have had so many just of those kind of seminal moments myself. And I mean, for that one, as you probably, and you know the story, where the name Forrester came from, was my high school English teacher,
Yeah.
Sharon Forrester, back in Enterprise. And, you know, she was there that night too with her
Cool.
family.
Oh, cool.
Oh, it was just the best. Yes, there's a lot of memories like that.
Cool. Let's see. You know, you mentioned some of the other ones you wrote early on, The Rookie, which was that was an adapted screenplay from a book, I believe, written by the pitcher himself, right?
Well, he had Jimmy Morris was, and that was another case of fate, because Finding Forrester was in production. And so I just happened to be down for a meeting in Los Angeles on Finding Forrester. I'm having breakfast. This was back in the days when you would get a real paper New York Times or LA Times, and I opened it up and I go straight to the sports page, and there was a picture of Jimmy Morris, who had just the night before pitched in Arlington, and the following night was going to pitch in Anaheim. And I often wonder if I hadn't been there at that breakfast, I hadn't seen that story, if I would have been late to the dance on the Rookie. And so I remember calling my agent. He put me in touch with Disney. One thing led to another, and next thing you know, I'm writing that script as well.
Well, and there's a scene from that movie that you know, grown man, I get teary-eyed, and obviously it's a true story, but you wrote it, where Jimmy Morris, played by Dennis Quaid, is on the phone talking to his maybe 7 or 8-year-old son, and tells him that he's been called up to the big leagues. And I get choked up just thinking about it now, Mike. The moment itself, but how it was written and played out on camera, it's so heartwarming. That father-son baseball, I made it, is just what a great piece of art that little scene was.
Oh, thank you. It's one of the scenes I'm most proud of, really. You know, just and it's great because of the performance that Dennis contributed to it. But not only Dennis, Rachel Griffiths, who played his wife, when she comes in and the phone rings, you know, I wrote in some dialogue so that the moment actually hangs for a second, where she gave her the line where, you know, he goes, hey, you know, he wants to spill it to her, and she goes, hey, honey, you got to hang on a second, I'm boiling over here. And so she has to go over to the stove, and she's like this, and he's just going, bursting at the seams to tell her. And so, I love that scene. I really do.
And you and I talked before about Miracle, which was the story of the 1980 USA hockey team that beat Russia, the Miracle on Ice, which you were a part of writing, but ended up not getting credit because somebody came in to do a rewrite and something about the Writers Guild rules about who gets credit and who doesn't, and you didn't. Is that right?
Yeah,
Do I
well,
remember that right?
it was the other way around. Eric Guggenheim was the writer, the first writer, and wrote two really structurally very strong, scripts that were, and so I was the one that followed. And yes, I did a lot of writing on that one, and but that's the way it works sometimes. And there's a lot of writing in there that obviously I'm very proud of, but Eric should be really proud of his work as well.
Yeah. So you want to share what's next, what you're working on, and we can keep an eye on the Mike Rich writing legacy, or
I'll tell you, the short answer is probably going to be I'm going to hold it a little bit to the vest for a little bit longer because I don't want to jinx anything.
Good. Go ahead.
But I'm really having fun writing on it. So I'll keep you posted.
Well, isn't that cool, Mike? I mean, I've talked to a lot of reporters and even some of the people that I work with in stand-up comedy here in Bend about just writing and what a special art form it is. And you and I learned how to writing news, but we were storytelling, and it's one of the skills that I've been given or learned over time that I'm proud of, but also gives me the most joy. Whether I'm writing a letter of recommendation for one of the kids that I've coached, or just writing something to craft, or a joke, or a series of jokes I'm writing for my stand-up routine, to craft it just right, and take time and revisit it and make it something that is impactful, whether emotionally or to the community. It's a joy to be a writer, isn't it?
It is, and I mean, and you'll know what I'm talking about here, especially from a standpoint maybe of crafting a joke, which is, you start off with intent. You have to, what is the message that you want to get across? And then you try to hide or shield or disguise that message so it's not too overt. And then once you've got that figured out, then it's rhythm. It's like music. You have to have that syncopation to it as well, because you don't want something that's going to be a mouthful for the writer to, the actor to get across. And one last thing about when you talk about, letters of recommendation for kids and stuff like that. I've been in this now long enough, making films for 20 years plus, that I recalled right after Finding Forrester came out, I talked to Jesuit High School, writing class at Jesuit High School. And afterwards, this young girl came up, she was a senior, and she had some follow-up questions about screenwriting. And she was sharp, and she, it was all the questions were about the craft, et cetera. And she goes, one of those where, is there anything I've overlooked? Is there a question that I should have asked that I didn't ask? And I love that. And I said, look, when you get a script that you're very proud of, and I told her about the Nickel Fellowship that I had talked about earlier, I said, enter it in that contest. And she won it 2 years ago.
Oh, really?
She won it. Like I said, I won the Nickel Fellowship in 1998 with 4,400 screenplays. I think she won it in 2018 with like 7,700 screenplays. So passing the baton is a beautiful thing. I think I love doing that.
Excellent, excellent.
Doesn't mean I'm done, but it means somebody else is carrying the torch.
Well, Mike, this has been a wonderful conversation. I love hearing your voice because I used to hear it all. I mean, I would hear it in the building when we would have chats, but hearing it over the airwaves was always so special. Without sounding too gushy, there have been very few people to come through our market who are as wonderfully friendly and kind and nice and caring as Mike Rich. And I know for a fact there's not a person in the world that has met you over time in this industry, in our industry, that didn't think that way and were just rooting like crazy for you to succeed. And the fact that you have, I mean, I can't be proud of you because you're not anything, but we're just so overjoyed at your success, because, you know, we should never write cliches, but it could not happen to a nicer person.
Thank you, Carl. I mean, I've treasured your friendship as well over the years. It was always great to bump into you in the hallway. So those are good memories, like you and I kind of alluded to. I feel really fortunate that we got to work in those industries in the era when we did.
Great.